My name is Sarah Chen, and I thought I understood the difference between entertainment and exploitation. 3 weeks ago, I found footage that changed everything I believed about true crime content. What started as research for my podcast became something that questions whether we're feeding an audience or feeding something much darker. Before I share what I discovered, I need you to understand why I was there. My podcast, Buried Truths, focuses on cold cases in Los Angeles. I've built my reputation on thorough research and respect for victims' families. But after 2 years of declining downloads and mounting pressure from my network, I was desperate for a breakout story. That's when I heard about Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital. The abandoned Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital sits in the Hollywood Hills like a concrete monument against the skyline. Closed in 1994, after a series of unexplained incidents, it had become legend for Los Angeles urban explorers. Local authorities had recently increased security after several break-ins, but that only made the story more appealing to my network executives. "This is perfect for your demographic," my producer Marcus said during our weekly call. "Young adults love this paranormal investigation content. Just do what you always do, but lean into the atmosphere." I should have recognized the warning signs. Marcus had never cared about atmosphere before. He cared about metrics, download numbers, and advertiser retention. But I needed this story to work. My research began at the Los Angeles Public Library downtown. Whitmore's official records painted a picture of systematic negligence rather than supernatural events. Overcrowding, understaffing, and several suspicious incidents between 1988 and 94. The final incident came when 3 patients were found unresponsive in a single week. The state investigation revealed years of documentation, irregularities, and missing surveillance footage. But buried in the microfilm archives, I found something else. A series of letters to the editor from 1993, written by Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former psychiatrist at Whitmore. Her letters claimed something was fundamentally wrong, beyond administrative negligence. She wrote about unusual patient behavior, shared experiences among residents who had never interacted, and what she called feeding patterns in the building's energy consumption records. The letters stopped abruptly in October 1993. Dr. Vasquez passed away in an accident 2 weeks later. Her final letter contained a single line that made my skin crawl. "We're not treating patients anymore. We're feeding something else." Finding Dr. Vasquez's surviving family took 3 days of calls and searches. Her daughter, Carmen Vasquez Martinez, lived in Pasadena and agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near her home. She was in her 50s, with graying hair and the careful posture of someone who had learned to guard their words. "Mom never talked about Whitmore after she quit," Carmen told me, stirring sugar into her coffee. She'd been passionate about her work her whole career, but something changed her there. She started having nightmares, checking locks multiple times, and she kept all our family photos in a fireproof safe. Carmen reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. After she passed, I found this in her bedroom closet. I never knew what to do with it. Inside were photocopies of patient files, internal memos, and Dr. Vasquez's personal notes. The patient files showed a disturbing pattern: residents with no history of aggressive behavior becoming increasingly agitated, reporting identical nightmares, and developing an unusual aversion to being alone. Several noted that patients would only calm down when gathered in groups. But it was Dr. Vasquez's personal notes that made my hands shake. She had documented strange occurrences throughout the hospital: cold spots that moved through rooms, electrical equipment draining power faster than normal, and security cameras that would malfunction during patient therapy sessions. Most unsettling were her observations about the building itself. Energy consumption highest during group therapy sessions. One note read, "Patients more docile afterward, but also more empty. Need to investigate connection between patient emotional states and building's electrical demands." Her final entry was dated 3 days before she quit. "It's not healing them, it's harvesting them. The building, the program, something is using their pain as fuel. I have to get them out before there's nothing left to save. Carmen watched me read with hollow eyes. The week before she passed, Mom tried to convince me to move out of Los Angeles entirely. She said something was spreading beyond Whitmore, that it had learned to adapt. She leaned forward, lowering her voice, but last month I started getting calls. Someone asking about her notes, her research. They knew details about her work that weren't in any official reports. When I hung up, they called back from different numbers. Always the same question: did she leave any recordings? Carmen's mention of recordings sent me back to Dr. Vasquez's notes. Hidden among her patient observations, I found references to session documentation and audio logs for personal review. I spent 2 days tracking down former Whitmore employees. Most refused to talk, but I finally reached James Hoffman, a maintenance worker employed there from 1985 until closure. Elena was one of the good ones, James told me over the phone. She actually cared about those patients, which is why what happened was so wrong. When I asked about recordings, James went quiet. She used to stay late, reviewing session tapes in her office. Sometimes I'd see her there at midnight, rewinding the same sections repeatedly. After she quit, I found a box of cassette tapes hidden behind a loose panel in her desk. My pulse quickened. What did you do with them? I kept them. Lena had asked me to watch for anything unusual. After her accident, I thought about giving them to her family, but I didn't want to cause more pain. They've been in my garage for 30 years. We arranged to meet the next day. James lived in a small house in Burbank, surrounded by neat landscaping. He led me to his garage, where he pulled a cardboard box from a high shelf. "I've never listened to these," he said, setting the box on his workbench. After what happened to Elena, I figured some things are better left alone. The box contained 12 cassette tapes, each labeled with dates from 1992 and 93. Dr. Vasquez's handwriting was precise, clinical, but I noticed it became increasingly erratic as the dates progressed. James provided an old cassette player. The first tape was a group therapy session from March 1992, featuring 6 patients discussing their treatment progress. Normal therapeutic conversation, nothing unusual. But by the 4th tape, dated September 1993, something had changed. The patients' voices had become monotonous, almost robotic. They spoke about their experiences in detached terms, as if describing someone else's life. More disturbing was what happened between their words, a low humming sound that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their breathing. Dr. Vasquez's voice on the recordings grew increasingly concerned. She asked probing questions, trying to elicit emotional responses from patients who had once been highly reactive. Instead, they answered in measured tones, describing difficult experiences like they were reading shopping lists. The final tape contained only Dr. Vasquez's voice, recorded in what sounded like an empty room. "This is my final documentation of the Whitmore program," her voice whispered through the static. "I believe the patients are being systematically drained of their emotional capacity through some form of energy harvesting. The entity or force responsible has learned to mimic therapeutic healing while actually feeding on human pain." Her breathing became ragged. "It's not limited to the building. Since starting this research, I've noticed changes in myself, my dreams, my energy levels, my ability to connect emotionally with my own family. It's following me home." The recording ended with a sound that made both James and me step back from the cassette player. It was the same low humming from the patient sessions, but this time it seemed to come from everywhere at once. James ejected the cassette with shaking hands. "That's enough for me. You can take the tapes, but I don't want to hear any more." Back in my apartment, I digitized all 12 cassettes and began analyzing them with audio software. The humming sound appeared on every tape after June 93, growing stronger as the months progressed. When I isolated the frequency, I discovered it matched the electrical resonance of standard building power systems, 60 hertz, but there was something else. Hidden beneath the humming, almost inaudible, were whispered voices, speaking in languages I didn't recognize, synchronized with the electrical pulse. I was so focused on the analysis that I almost missed the email notification. Marcus had sent a message at 2 a.m. Great research on the Whitmore story. Network executives are very interested. They want to fast-track production and do a multi-part series. This could be big for both of us. I hadn't told Marcus about the tapes yet. Our last conversation had been 3 days ago, when I'd only mentioned visiting Carmen. How did he know enough about my research to call it great? My phone rang. Marcus. Sarah, fantastic work on this story. The network loves the psychological angle, this idea that emotions can be harvested and consumed. Very contemporary, very relevant to current true crime trends. Marcus, I haven't submitted anything yet. How do you know about the psychological angle? A pause. You mentioned it in your last update, remember? The therapist who thought something was feeding on patients' emotions? I hadn't mentioned that. I'd only told him about visiting the archives and meeting with a family member. Marcus, I need to be clear about something. This story isn't just about historical negligence. There's evidence of something genuinely dangerous, still connected to Whitmore. Another pause, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed. Flatter, more measured. Sarah, you're overthinking this. True crime audiences want compelling narratives, not speculation. Focus on the human elements, the victims, the cover-up, the institutional failure. After hanging up, I realized Marcus had used almost the exact same tone as the patients in Dr. Vasquez's later recordings. I spent the night researching my own network, Pacific Media Group. My podcast's parent company had been acquired 6 months ago by a larger conglomerate called Resonance Entertainment. Resonance Entertainment owns 17 different true crime podcasts, 3 documentary production companies, and a digital media platform specializing in immersive experiences. Their corporate website was full of buzzwords about engaging audiences through authentic emotional content and leveraging psychological engagement for maximum retention. But buried in their investor reports, I found something disturbing. Resonance Entertainment's primary revenue stream came from what they called audience emotional data harvesting, analyzing listener responses to determine optimal content for triggering specific psychological states. They weren't just producing entertainment. They were studying how to manipulate emotions on a mass scale. Against every instinct, I decided to visit Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital myself. The hospital sat on 15 acres in the Hollywood Hills, surrounded by chain-link fence, reinforced with razor wire. Security cameras were mounted every 50 feet, but they were all pointed inward toward the building rather than outward. I found a section where previous explorers had cut through the fence. The moment I stepped onto the hospital grounds, I felt it, a low vibration in the air almost below the threshold of hearing, but somehow present in my bones. The main building was 6 stories of concrete and steel, designed in the brutalist style popular in the 60s. Most windows were boarded up, but several on the upper floors had been broken out entirely, leaving dark rectangles like empty eye sockets. I'd brought a digital recorder and camera, but as I approached the main entrance, my equipment began malfunctioning. The camera's battery drained from full to dead in minutes, and the digital recorder produced only static. The front doors had been chained shut, but I found a service entrance on the east side that someone had pried open. Inside, the hallways were littered with debris, broken ceiling tiles, fallen plaster, and 30 years of decay. But underneath, I could see remnants of the hospital's original purpose: therapy room doors with reinforced glass windows, nurses' stations with built-in storage, and common areas designed for patient gatherings. I made my way to the 3rd floor, where Dr. Vasquez's office had been located. Most doors hung open, revealing empty rooms gutted by vandals and weather. But when I reached room 307, I found something different. The door was closed and locked, but not with the simple push-button locks used throughout the building. This was a heavy deadbolt, installed from the inside, with fresh scratches around the keyhole. I knocked, feeling ridiculous, but unable to shake the sensation that someone was inside. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence, then so faintly I almost missed it. That familiar humming sound from Dr. Vasquez's recordings. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the air itself. As it grew louder, I realized it wasn't just auditory. I could feel it in my chest, synchronizing with my heartbeat, making my vision blur. I stumbled backward, but the sound followed me down the hallway. With each step, the humming grew more complex, adding harmonics and overtones that formed almost words in languages I didn't understand. By the time I reached the stairwell, I was running, but the sound had gotten into my head, continuing even after I'd left the building and reached my car. It wasn't until I was driving away that I realized what the almost words had been saying. They'd been speaking names, hundreds of names whispered in rhythm with the electrical hum. And one of them had been mine. I drove straight home and began researching the names I'd heard. Most were difficult to spell based on pronunciation alone, but a few had been clear enough to search online. What I found confirmed my worst fears. The names belonged to podcasters, documentary filmmakers, and journalists who had covered true crime stories over the past 5 years. Each had started with standard investigative work, then gradually shifted toward more sensationalized content that focused on victim experiences and psychological elements. More disturbing, several had experienced career trajectories similar to my own. Initial success followed by declining engagement, pressure from networks to produce more extreme content, and eventual burnout that ended their careers entirely. I spent 6 hours creating a timeline, mapping the career changes of these content creators against the expansion of companies like Resonance Entertainment. The correlation was undeniable. One name on my list stood out, David Richardson, who had hosted a popular true crime podcast called Dark Corners until his sudden retirement 6 months ago. His final episode had been about missing persons cases in Los Angeles, including a segment on Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital. I found David's website and sent him an email. Within an hour, he called me. "You need to stop," were his first words. "Whatever you think you're investigating, you need to stop right now and walk away." "David, I think there's something connecting all of us. These networks, this content." "I know what it is," he interrupted. "I've known for months, and I know you went to Whitmore yesterday, because I've been monitoring activity around that place since I quit." My blood went cold. How could you possibly know that? Because once you're connected to this thing, it tracks you, every device you carry, every network you access, every piece of content you consume or create. It's all part of the same system. David's voice carried the same detached quality I'd heard in Dr. Vasquez's patients, but underneath was pure terror. It starts with legitimate research. You find a genuinely disturbing story, something that happened to real people, but as you dig deeper, the story starts digging back. It learns about you, your fears, your experiences, and it begins incorporating them into the narrative. "Then why are you telling me this?" A bitter laugh. "It already knows. It wants me to warn you because fear makes the content more authentic. Every person who tries to expose this thing just becomes another layer of the story, another level of mystery for the next investigator to uncover." The line went quiet, except for that familiar humming sound, now coming through my phone speaker. "David, are you still there?" When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "It's here. It found me. Don't trust your network, don't trust your equipment, and whatever you do, don't publish this story." The call ended with a sound like electrical feedback. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, I had made a decision that went against every instinct that had made me a journalist. I was going to bury the story, but first, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I spent the morning creating an encrypted backup of all my research files, uploading them to a secure server. Then I called Marcus to tell him I was abandoning the Whitmore story due to lack of credible evidence. "That's disappointing, Sarah," Marcus said, though he didn't sound disappointed. He sounded relieved. After hanging up, I realized Marcus hadn't asked any follow-up questions about my research. For a producer who usually demanded detailed reports, his lack of interest was telling. I was formatting my hard drive when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 30s with a professional appearance. "Miss Chen, my name is Dr. Lisa Park. I'm a psychiatrist, and I believe we have mutual concerns about media exploitation of experiences." I opened the door, but kept the security chain attached. "I'm sorry, but I'm not currently working on any stories involving psychiatric care." "I know about Whitmore," she said quietly, "and I know about Dr. Elena Vasquez. I've been tracking the spread of whatever she discovered, and I think you're in danger." Dr. Park showed me her credentials, and I let her inside. She immediately went to my living room window, checking the street before closing the blinds. "How many people have you told about your research?" she asked. "My producer knows I was investigating Whitmore, but I haven't shared specific details." I stopped realizing I'd told Carmen about finding her mother's recordings. "The spread isn't random," Dr. Park said. "It follows information networks, who talks to whom, who shares what details. Every person who learns about the original incident becomes a potential host for further expansion." She pulled out a tablet showing a network diagram that looked like a virus infection map. At the center was the hospital, but radiating outward were connections to media companies, research institutions, and individual content creators. The entity needs emotional energy to survive, but it also needs information networks to spread. True crime media provides both audiences experiencing emotional responses and creators investigating real cases. I studied the diagram and felt my stomach drop. How many people are connected? Conservatively, several thousand directly, but potentially millions through secondary exposure via podcasts, videos, and social media shares. The implications hit me like a physical blow. My podcast had over 50,000 regular listeners. There has to be a way to stop it. Dr. Park shook her head. Dr. Vasquez thought she could expose it through documentation. David Richardson thought he could starve it by refusing to create more content. Both approaches just fed it different types of energy: fear, resistance, the desire to warn others.
"Then, what do you suggest?"
Complete disconnection from all networks, digital and personal. No internet, no phone, no contact with anyone connected to the story. It's the only way to avoid becoming a transmission vector. As if to emphasize her point, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The story isn't finished yet. Dr. Park left me with an impossible choice: disappear completely, or risk spreading something that fed on human experiences. But as I sat surrounded by the tools of my trade, I realized there was a third option. I could publish the story, but change it fundamentally. Instead of creating content that fed the entity, I could warn people about the dangers of exploitation in media. The risk was enormous. If I was wrong, I would spread it to thousands of new hosts. But if I did nothing, other journalists would eventually stumble onto the same trail. I spent the day writing a different version of the Whitmore story. Instead of focusing on mysterious events and supernatural elements, I wrote about the ethics of true crime media, the exploitation of families, and the psychological impact on audiences who consume difficult content for entertainment. I structured it as a confession rather than an investigation, admitting my own complicity in the system that treats real human experiences as content to be packaged and marketed. I included warnings about the addictive nature of such media and encouraged listeners to examine their own motivations. Most importantly, I ended by announcing my retirement from true crime podcasting and recommending that audiences seek out content that uplifted rather than exploited vulnerable communities. As I prepared to upload the episode, my phone rang. Marcus. Sarah, I hope you're not doing anything hasty. The network has been discussing your situation, and we think you might benefit from some professional support. The offer should have sounded caring, but his tone was that same detached monotone. I appreciate the concern, Marcus, but I've made my decision. I'm leaving true crime behind. That would be unfortunate for everyone. You have a gift for this work, and there are so many stories that need to be told. I could hear the humming sound starting up in the background of our call. Goodbye, Marcus. I hung up and immediately published my final episode. The response was unlike anything I'd experienced. Within hours, I received hundreds of messages from listeners sharing their own experiences with true crime addiction, their growing discomfort with exploitation elements, and their appreciation for my honesty about ethical problems in the medium. But mixed in with supportive messages were others that made my skin crawl. Comments from accounts I didn't recognize, expressing disappointment that I hadn't told the real story about Whitmore. Several mentioned specific details about my investigation that I hadn't included in the published episode. More disturbing were messages claiming to be from other content creators who had investigated similar stories. Each described experiences that paralleled my own, initial skepticism giving way to genuine terror, equipment malfunctions, and the growing sense of being watched. One message stood out. It came from an account with no profile information, and the username was simply a string of numbers that looked like coordinates. You did well, Sarah. The story you told wasn't the story you found, but it was the story that needed to be told. Some of us have been waiting for someone with your platform to choose truth over feeding the beast. There are others like you who recognized what they were dealing with and made similar choices. We stay connected, but carefully. If you're interested in real solutions rather than just personal escape, reply to these coordinates. The numbers led to a location in rural Oregon, near a small town called Millfield. When I researched the area, I found it had unusually low internet penetration and a population resistant to social media adoption. After hours of consideration, I chose investigation over safety. The drive to Millfield took me through beautiful countryside, but my mind was consumed with questions about what I might find. The coordinates led to a small farmhouse, surrounded by gardens, and what appeared to be a workshop filled with electronic equipment. A woman in her 60s answered my knock. Dr. Elena Vasquez, I said, though I knew it was impossible. She smiled sadly. Dr. Elena Vasquez passed away 30 years ago. I'm her sister, Maria. Elena managed to get a message to me before her passing, warning me about what she discovered and asking me to continue her work. Maria led me inside, where I found 4 other people working with equipment I didn't recognize. Devices that looked like modified radio transceivers connected to computers running custom software. We call ourselves the Static Network, Maria explained. Allard Russell realized that the entity spreads through conventional information channels, internet, phone lines, broadcast media, but it has trouble with certain types of interference. We've developed communication methods that can slip between its detection patterns. A young man named Alex showed me their monitoring setup. We track the entity's expansion by analyzing metadata from true crime content platforms. Certain patterns in engagement metrics, comment linguistics, and creator behavioral changes indicate when it's establishing new host relationships. The screens displayed network maps, updated in real time, covering dozens of different media properties. Your decision to publish a warning rather than the exploitative story created a disruption in its feeding pattern. Alex continued, instead of gaining energy from audience responses, it actually lost energy when listeners began questioning their consumption habits. A woman named Sarah looked up from another workstation. The entity needs genuine human emotion to survive, and it can't synthesize authentic feelings through manipulation alone. When people become aware of how they're being exploited, their emotional responses change in ways that make them less useful as energy sources. Maria handed me a tablet, displaying my podcast's analytics from the past week. Look at the engagement patterns after your farewell episode. The comments aren't just supportive, they're actionable. People are unsubscribing from exploitative content, seeking out advocacy organizations, and having genuine conversations about media ethics. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. So it can be fought. It can be starved, Maria corrected, but only if enough people understand what they're feeding and make conscious choices to starve it. I've been working with the Static Network for 2 months now, and I want to share what we've learned about fighting back against entities that feed on human experiences through media exploitation. First, the consumption of true crime content isn't inherently harmful, but the motivations behind that consumption matter enormously. When we engage with these stories to understand social problems, support advocacy, or examine systemic failures, we participate in beneficial discourse. But when we consume difficult content purely for entertainment, seeking emotional stimulation from others' experiences, we become part of a feeding system that incentivizes exploitation. Second, creators in this space have enormous responsibility for how they present material. Whether the entity we encountered is literally supernatural or simply a metaphor for the worst impulses in media capitalism, it thrives on content that prioritizes audience engagement over dignity. Every time we choose sensationalism over sensitivity, we feed something that makes the world darker. Third, audiences have power they rarely recognize. Every subscription, every share, every comment that demands more extreme content sends signals about what types of stories should be produced. By consciously choosing to support ethical creators and rejecting exploitative content, audiences can literally starve harmful entities of the energy they need to survive. The Static Network continues to monitor and disrupt these feeding patterns, but their work is only effective if people are willing to make difficult choices about their media consumption. The most important thing I've learned is that transparency is the entity's greatest weakness. It thrives in unconscious consumption, in unexamined motivations that drive both creators and audiences to seek increasingly extreme content. When people become aware of how they're being manipulated, the feeding relationship breaks down. I'm not saying people should stop consuming true crime content entirely, but I am asking you to examine why you're drawn to these stories and what you hope to get from them. Are you seeking understanding, justice, or awareness, or are you looking for a thrill, a dose of vicarious experience that makes your own problems feel smaller? The entity feeds on that second motivation. It grows stronger every time someone clicks because they want to feel scared, every time someone shares a story because it gave them chills, every time someone demands more details because the existing information isn't shocking enough. The choice isn't between entertainment and boredom. It's between content that makes us more empathetic, informed, and socially conscious, and content that treats human experiences as a commodity to be consumed. Whether or not there's literally a parasitic entity feeding through digital networks, there are definitely systems that profit from exploitation and manipulation. The humming sounds, the equipment malfunctions, the sense of being watched, these might have been psychological responses to discovering how deeply complicit I'd become in harmful systems, or they might have been something else entirely. The important thing isn't whether the supernatural elements are literally true, but whether the ethical problems they represent are being addressed. This is my last true crime story, and I want to end it with a request rather than a revelation. If this story has made you think differently about media consumption, share that reflection with others, not by forwarding this particular story, but by having conversations about media ethics in your own communities. If you're a creator, Consider how you can tell important stories without exploiting the people in them. Ask yourself whether your content makes the world more just or just more entertained. If you're a consumer, support creators who prioritize ethics over engagement. Seek out content that educates rather than titillates, that uplifts rather than sensationalizes. And if you encounter media that seems designed to harvest your responses for someone else's profit, remember that you have the power to starve those systems by choosing not to feed them. The entity we discovered might be supernatural, or it might be a metaphor for the worst aspects of media capitalism. Either way, it only has as much power as we give it through our choices. Choose consciousness over unconscious consumption. Choose empathy over entertainment. Choose to support systems that value human dignity over engagement metrics. The real concern isn't that there might be entities feeding on human experiences through digital networks. The real concern is that we've built systems that do this openly, and most of us participate without questioning whether our participation makes the world better or worse. Every story we tell and every story we choose to consume is a vote for the kind of world we want to live in. The static network will continue monitoring, containing, and disrupting exploitation patterns in media. But the real solution isn't technical, it's personal. It's the choice each of us makes about what we're willing to support and what we're brave enough to resist. Choose wisely. The health of our information ecosystem depends on it.